Hey guys, and welcome back to another Football Manager video. And welcome back to TS Galaxy, my team in South Africa, as I try to finish off my Pentagon Challenge. The first season has now ended, and what we'll do in this video is recap that first season, and then we'll do the summer transfer window to prepare for the season ahead. And it's been a pretty good first season. We came 6th, which I think is a pretty good performance for the team, given that when I joined, I think something like 10 games into the season, we were 14th, and I think the media prediction was 9th. So to come 6th is pretty good. And if you look at the league table, which you can see on the screen, you could see, let's put it back, there we go, see here, the top 5 were in a different league of their own, and you can really see that by the goal difference. They all had goal differences of 20 goals or more, pretty much. And then there was a step down. So we were best of the rest at TS Galaxy, which is a decent start. And now the task is to get that little bit higher. I think the top 2 clubs qualify for the African Champions League. And so that's right. And then 3rd and 4th qualify for a sort of Europa League equivalent called the Confederation Cup. We need to get into the top 2 to qualify for the Champions League. So we haven't done that this time around. We were never going to. We've got 5 clubs that are in a completely different position to everybody else. And so the task is to break into those 5 and then try and work our way into the top 2 and then eventually be dominant in the South African League, which will hopefully translate into being competitive in the African Champions League. But that's a goal over several years. The other thing in this season is that we did win something called the Nedbank Cup, which is good, just to get a trophy and get some momentum from that. But really, it's the league performance we're focused on, and we came 6th. And just to follow up on the players that we signed in the previous video, we signed predominantly 3 forwards mainly. The first one was a guy called Balolyi, and originally we signed him on loan from Kaizer Chiefs, and then immediately once the loan began, I started trying to sign a full-time contract, which I now have managed to do. So we signed him on a free transfer, 3-year deal at £1,100 a week, which is cheap. We could easily be paying now, and I'll come to the finances later, 3,000 or 4,000 for a player in our starting 11. So to get somebody at that quality for 1,100 is great. He's coming in with 4-star current ability, 5-star potential relative to our squad, which isn't quite yet a competitive squad. But he's been a strong performer. 3 goals in his first 4 goals in 12 appearances and some substitute appearances. Not a bad start. I think he can improve from there. Then we had Washington Brown, who is another forward that we signed in the winter window. And again, another successful integration into team. Slightly worse returns over the season as a whole, but if you then look at the bit where he played for us, you'll see that it's pretty good, 7 goals from 12. So that's solid from him. And then the other guy that we signed across our forward line, we signed 3 forwards, and they've all gone straight into the first team. So this guy Bongani Dadlia, and again, he's been great as well. And so all 3 of the forwards are firing, and that's pretty strong. Not quite as clearly a strong performance from the other guys that we signed. We signed a defensive midfielder called Nkobo, who took most of this season to adjust his new position of defensive midfield, but was sort of okay to begin with while playing for us. But I think he's got potential to be better than okay in future seasons. Now he's got used to his new position. And then Lakata, who's a defender, plays on the right side of our back 3. And he was, again, only okay, but is just settling in. So those are the players that we brought in. The 3 forwards, just showing on the screen here, Brown, Dadley, and Beloyi, were the 3 forwards that we brought in, Nkobo, and then Lakata. And so those were the guys that they've all done okay with the forwards as the highlights. If you look, as we look forward now, and as I say, we've just got to the summer window. It's the 1st of July when you join me, so that means we've gone through the 30th of June and the contracts have expired on quite a few players. Some of them have left the club, some of them haven't quite yet left the club, but in the fullness of time, they will. And we're down to, let's get this number right, We are down to 17 players that have got contracts with us for more than a year, and that of those, I think we've got about 3 that we would rather not have those contracts, and all the rest are players that we see as part of the squad for a while. If I show you that in the grid that I typically use, we'll see what I mean by that. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players that I think of as starters. This guy, Isaacs, who plays on the left side of our back 3, is a little bit more tentative than the others, but there's a good sort of 6 or 7 now starters out of 11. And by starters, I mean players that I think would be able to contend for winning the league in South Africa. They're at levels that are sort of roughly similar to what we can see from the squad at Sundowns, which we use as the benchmark. But we've got certainly 3 gaps and arguably 4 or 5 gaps, because I think these central defenders that we've got in at the moment are probably a step below where they need to be. And so in this summer transfer window, we'll look to see if we can fill some of those gaps. What I have done already, because I had to, without a great deal of time to spare, was sign a goalkeeper. So I've signed this goalkeeper, Van Wyk, who came in just at the beginning of the summer window. And the reason why I've signed him hurriedly at the end of the season, instead of waiting to the 30th of June for contracts to expire, was because he was one of a small number of decent South African goalkeepers that I had identified. And there were 2 goalkeepers at one club, SuperSport United, who have just won the league. And he was one of them. And then the other guy was this goalkeeper, Levi Mitchali. And Levi Mitchali, with 17 agility and 16 reflexes and decent other ratings, is too good to be playing in South Africa. And it's just a matter of time before someone signs him. And sure enough, there's been a bid from a club in, I think, Saudi Arabia for him. So I realised that was the likely dynamic, and so came in to sign their backup goalkeeper, who for us will be a significant upgrade. He's been brought in for 275,000, which is a big fee in the context of South Africa, where a big fee is sort of 700,000 or something. But for us, we needed a goalkeeper, and it was probably the best option we were ever likely to get a chance at anytime soon. So I ran in and got him. We've got quite a lot of money. Just to recap, before we get into looking at the players for the summer window and to end the recap, we've got a lot of money. So we've got £10 million, which in South African context is a lot. That compares with our payroll, and our payroll as compared with the 10 million that we've got is about, well, it says here 1.65 million a year. Remember, we're 3 or 4 first teamers short. So let's call that about 2 million, maybe a bit more, which is a mid-table payroll. We might have the 8th or 9th biggest payroll. We just finished 6th, and we hope to finish eventually in the top 2. I think at some point we'll need to increase what we're paying on players. And the question becomes, is this the summer where we do it? And the initial look at players that I've done before I hit record tells me that the answer is probably no. And the problem that we face is going to be reputation. So if we look at the clubs in South Africa, so we go here and click on clubs, and then we sort it by reputation. Even though we've had a reasonably good season finishing 6th, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th best by reputation in South Africa. And there are 6 teams that have got a 3-star rating. We've only got 2.5. Now, in practice, I think what we can see from the league table is that there's 4 or 5 clubs that are quite a bit better than the others. And so we've got a gap to fill in our reputation before we can move up to sign the sort of players that those guys sign. And I notice from a quick look at who's willing to join us and who's willing to join them, that in particular for overseas players, we're allowed 5 overseas players in the squad that can be registered. We can't really compete at the moment for decent players, and we can't draw decent players, whereas the bigger clubs in South Africa can to a greater extent. And so I think reputation is a constraint. We could spend if the talent was there, but I don't think that it is. And to give you a specific example of that, I'll just show you the centre backs that I've identified. So I've identified, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 8 centre backs just by going through and pre-screening centre-backs. Now, I'll put this view on here where the attributes that I think are important for centre-backs are highlighted, with a group on the left of acceleration, pace, jumping, reach and composure as the first group, and then a second group, heading, marking, positioning, passing, tackling, strength. And if you sort it by acceleration, which I think is the most important one, then there aren't really any complete players in there. There's sort of decent players, but there's nobody who's absolutely complete. However, when you put it into the scoring system that I use, and I use this to blend together the attributes with a weighting based on what I think is most important, we can then see that there was a standout of the centre backs, and that standout I have actually agreed a deal with, and I propose now actually to go ahead with it. I'm going to go ahead now. So this guy David Mollecom scores at 12.3. There's then a 12, and then everybody else is below that. If you look at Mollecom in the game, he's quite encouraging actually to look at. He's got only 12 acceleration with 14 pace, but 16 jumping reach and decent tackling and positioning. He is 19 years old, South African, has played in the under-21s in South Africa, and is 6'6". So I think all in all, that's quite a promising combination when you consider he's the best scoring player on the scoring system. He hasn't played much at all at the Premier Division level in South Africa, so we can't really tell how he'll perform from that. But if you go back and look at what we've got at the moment, his over 12 score is more in line with the players at Sundowns. It's a bit of a surprise he's not going to go back and complete for a place in their first 11. Instead, we can sign him if we want to. I've agreed a deal which is for 250,000. I think we're raising to 300,000 with appearances. I'm just going to bring that up now, and I'm going to confirm that transfer. Here he is. So we've agreed 1,300 a week, which again is very low actually for a player of his calibre, I think. A high upfront fee of 250,000, but then and 50,000 more if he plays 50 games, which I'm fairly sure he will. And then a 3-year contract, which again is something that we've looked for because he's young and he probably can develop a bit. But it's not the development we're signing. We're going to sign a player for now. It's not the development we're looking for. All the other guys we've identified don't quite look like they're at the level we need. Here's Mollecom coming into the team, so that's great. And then I'll just do the thing I always do, which is just set his individual training for the role I want him to do. Because I think that's quite an important thing, just to make sure he's doing the right stuff. But the other centre backs that I was looking at were just not quite at the same level, and so while they're quite interesting, I don't think they're the guys that are going to play for us in a future African Champions League final. And the same is true in all the other positions that I've been looking at. It's true at wing back, where we could use a right back. Going back to the grid, we haven't got a first choice right back really. We've got a guy called Gumedi, who I brought in very much as a transplant. He was a right winger with 4 tackling, but he did have 18 pace, so we put him in, and he's played pretty well actually, but isn't really a right back. So we need to find a right back. We need to find some depth at centre back, and we need to find a starter at defence midfield. And so in this window, we're going to go through and try to do all of those things. The other thing we're going to do, which I think is probably the starting point, and again use the benefit of our fairly large balance, which was over 10 million, but I've just spent 250,000 on a centre back, is to try and improve our training facilities. Not because we're particularly bothered about the impact that's going to have on development of players, which will be so I expect anyway. The facilities we've got at the moment are, where are they? 3-star. They're okay, not great. It says good, which I suppose is all right. But what I do think is if we upgrade these, it's a bit like buying a bit more reputation. Now, the problem with training facility upgrades is that you never know how much they're going to cost, or at least I don't think you do. If anybody's got a grid of what they cost at each level, and maybe they vary by, I've always thought they probably vary by different country or something, but I don't know. and I'm about to find out how much it costs. And if it's several million, then I probably won't upgrade them again. But I'm upgrading them now because it will give us a bit more reputation and a bit more pull on players. Basically, I think the players that we can pull at the moment into the club are not quite at the level to compete with the top clubs, unless there's a young player that's sort of coming out of those clubs that's sort of a bit of bit of luck, really, which is what we've had with the goalkeeper and now the new centre forward who we've just signed. I think beyond that, we're going to need to be a little bit more patient, wait for our reputation to grow, and in particular, wait until sufficiently interesting overseas players will sign for us. That might happen at the end of this window, just before the window ends, in sort of late August, but it also might not. So I think we need to be patient. In the meantime, let's see if we can do the training. And before we get to the training, we've got an unhappy player, and the reason he's unhappy is because we did have an offer from Tenerife in Spain, which I rejected. He's got a contract till 2048, and they only offered a few thousand, and we can't afford to replace him. We'll say very influential, which is obviously the thing to click on for this screen, I've always found, but he's not actually that influential. He's only 18 years old, and so we'll have to go for "you're going nowhere." So see how he goes. So that's pretty much where we are. I'm going to come back. I'll leave it there for a while. I'll come back once I've looked at all of the various options at wing back and defence midfield, and I've narrowed it down to a smaller number. And we'll look through and probably see if we can make a couple of signings. All right, so a couple more updates from a week or so later. And the first one is the training facilities. The board's agreed to do it, and it's going to cost $1.5 million, which in the context of our sort of 9 or so million, 10 million cash position is right, but it's quite a lot in the context of this club where we're buying players for a couple of $100,000 a time. And it is just straightforwardly an attempt to buy reputation and a bit more pull for players by the time these are finished December. So we should have that in time for the January window, and maybe that will enable us to sign some better players. So that's that. And then in terms of players we have been trying to sign, so Paputla, who's the right back that we were looking for, we had a bid accepted where the wage would have been, I think it was $2,500. Just a reminder that Paputla is a right-sided wing back, score of 12.4, into the 12s, and so interesting, but not absolutely amazing. Acceleration 11, I didn't like. If that was 12 or 13, well, if that's 13 or 14, different conversation. But 11 acceleration is a clear flaw, and so I thought we would try to sign him, but we wouldn't pay too much. 2 and a bit thousand we bid, and Angers in France have bid 7,000. So that's the end of that. What we've done instead is signed on loan this guy, Shabalala, who is not as good as Paputla, but there's not that much in it. I think it's 12 on the scoring system. It's 12.4, plays 12.2. I don't think the scoring system is precise enough that those points make enough of a difference to care. If you look at this, Paputla's a better defender, but Shabalala's got a bit more pace and, or a bit more acceleration, to be specific. He hasn't got a bit more pace. We just look at them as wing backs on support. I think that they're players in a roughly similar tier. Paputla's better, but not unrecognisably better. And, on the one hand, he was 7,000 a week, which is far more than we're ever going to pay. For a really good player, I think we're capping out at about 4,000 or something, whereas Shabalala comes in on an inexpensive loan. So I think the loan is, let's just confirm that loan now. The loan is for his wage of $875 a week, and then a monthly fee of 5,000, which is based on an extra 1,000 and a bit. So it's 2,000 a week. Don't get to keep the player, but by the time we've had our new training facilities built, there'll be better players willing to sign for us, possibly even overseas players, all being well. And that will be something we can deal with in the future. But that's Shabalala, he comes in. And then the other guy, so just put him on the grid here at right back. It's our starting right back 12.2, which compares with Sundowns, who had wing backs at 12.6 and 11.5. So we're starting to get competitive towards the top, I think, end of the table. And then we've got, in the left side of our defence midfield, this guy called Nene. So just a reminder of the tactic. The tactic here, Shabalala's going to go as a right wing back. It's a sort of 3-4-3. And then we were looking for someone to play on the left side of this defence midfield too. And here I've signed a guy that I identified at the last window called Nene. He was 60,000 fee and then 2,200 per week. And he signed a 3-year contract. He looks all right. Acceleration and pace, 13 and 12 is only okay, I think, at this level. But stamina 15, work rate 14 is good. Passing's only 10 for a midfielder, not great, but tackling 13. I just thought it was a good addition and adds the work rate and a bit of bite we were lacking last season. We didn't really have enough of a press. If you look at the guy he replaces, there's a guy called Ungubane. You can see it's a completely different type of player. And so instead of Ungubane, who was a kind of 5'4" attacking midfielder, this guy is a defensive midfielder with high work rate and can build in a press. So they're just completely different. Ungubane, by the way, is at the top of our dynamics chart and hates me. It completely hates me and wants rid of me. And unfortunately, to some degree, the feeling's mutual because he's got a 2,000 a week contract, which ideally we would spend on somebody else. Having said that, if we can't find another defence midfielder, I think this guy played reasonably. He's average last season, rating 6.76. He was a sort of below par starter, but he can be a decent backup for us. So if that's what it needs to be, then that's what it'll be. What I'm going to do now, that's enough, I think, of the transfers for a while. We do need backup in various positions. I'm going to let a bit more time pass and then do another look around for players in the hope that with the benefit of a couple of weeks having passed, more players might consider us that are on the free transfer list. And then also, I do think there's a dynamic in the game where the quality of your first 11 is something that other players look at, and so your pulling power improves as you sign better players. I don't know that for sure, but I've seen it happen many times where if you make 3 or 4 decent signings, then you tend to find there are other players who suddenly become interested who were not interested before. So on the basis of that, with a bit of time and that effect, maybe, just maybe, some more players will be interested. Maybe not, but we'll find out. And if anything interesting crops up before the end of the window, then I'll come back further in the video. So we've moved on to the first week of September, and the reason why we've stopped here is because this was the transfer deadline week in the Premier League and the big leagues in European football. And so we thought now would be a good time just to stop and look to see what kind of talent was out there for loan as international players. And the answer was not much. There were a few players, but I'll come to look in a minute at the players that we looked at. Just a quick recap as the season has begun on how we've got going. So reasonably well is the answer. We had a good opening couple of games in the league. Won the first 3 games in the league. We are second. But we then got beaten pretty clearly by Sundowns in our most recent fixture. And if you watch the match, I mean, we were unlucky. There were 3 players sent off, but including one in the second minute. So I'm not sure that's entirely representative, but if you watch the games that we're having at the moment, we are it's fairly obvious what's going on. Our first 11 is competitive and pretty good, and then when our first 11 isn't available for injury or tiredness reasons, our backups just aren't quite good enough. And the backups, I think it's not really a question of getting megastar backups, but what I thought just looking at it was we needed some sort of willing runners, really. We just needed players that would attempt at least as best as possible to fill the spaces in the team. At the minute, we had this kind of 2-speed team going on, with the first 11 being pretty good, and then whoever comes on as a substitute or a replacement or rotation, it just not anything like the same level, and also just not putting in enough to sort of help with the press for that. So what I did is I went away and looked at who we could loan, and I've about to make 5 signings. One of them I've already made, which is the green one here, Shabalala, which confusingly means we've got 2 Shabalalas in the team, one on loan and one signed permanently. And then I've signed 4 players on loan. The 4 players on loan who are in, actually 3 of them are on loan. One of them's on a permanent deal, but a short-term contract. The red guys on this grid are really there just to be depth and temporary, really. The expectation would be that at the end of this season we'll find somebody else. As I said earlier, I think the club's reputation will grow and we'll be able to fill these spaces much better. So it's 4 guys just for the time being, really. Bit a bit of a stopgap on each case, and then the guy in green, Shabalala, I've signed as a permanent. I think he's quite promising, and if I just look at him, we signed him for 190,000 from Orlando Pirates, and the game has him as a centre back, but I think of him as a defence midfielder because he's got 16 work rate and 15 stamina, and then 13 acceleration, 12 pace. I think there is a little bit of prospect that this guy will grow from here, but he's 19. He's a under 20 international in South Africa. He's got potential ability. I'm not sure how much of that he'll realise, but some of it. But he's good enough to play now. He's only got 9 passing, which means that he's not going to be the world's best defence midfielder. 7 composure, and 6 off the ball. But I think he's going to be just about good enough to play for us for a while and probably be sufficiently worthy of minutes in our squad that I think that's, for our level, a decent signing, a bit of an overpay, but we were getting to the point where I was starting to realise that the cracks in our squad were already going to show. So I just sort of pressed on and signed this guy, even though I don't think he will spend that much time in the starting 11. Could be wrong. Then we've got a few other guys. As I say, we've got Machunu here, who's a left wing back. Let's just go through the other guys. Machunu is a left wing back who is only moderately interesting. Again, this is just a signing because we're going to need a left wing back when our main guy isn't available, and this was the best I could find, so in he goes. Same idea with the central defenders. I signed 2 of them. This guy Hlong Wayne, who's got at least got acceleration, pace, jumping reach. He's quite good physically. He's got 17 bravery, so that's interesting. Tackling 16. The rest of it is not so great. I think he's a sort of below average starter. I don't think he's played many minutes at the Premier League level, only a few, but he wasn't quite at the level. So he can be a backup. And then there's a young guy that's been signed inexpensively. All these guys are inexpensive loans. They're not free loans, but they're inexpensive. This guy, again, not really at the level, but is going to be better than the guys we've got in our reserves. And then this guy's actually all right, Mofok Heng, which, again, the game thinks of him as a centre-back. I don't. I think he's a defence midfielder who's got 14 work rate, so he'll be running around for us in the centre of midfield. And these guys are depth. They are not going to be the guys that move the needle. So what we're going to do is, I think from now, it's the 5th of September in game, we're going to sign all 5 of these guys. And I'm going to now go forward to the winter transfer window. So I'm going to leave it there for this video. I'll probably come back in winter and just see if anything has changed. Our training facility will be finished. Hopefully our reputation will have improved a bit. Hopefully we'll do well enough in the league that we can start to think about drawing slightly better players into the club. Maybe, maybe not. Don't know. Thank you for watching this video, and do let me know in the comments if there's anything I'm doing with this club that you think is completely bananas. Be very interested to hear that. And I shall see you in the next one. Thanks.